Kind of a voice. I wanted to give you guys an update. I told you last week what our Christmas offering was going to be for this year, and that is to help some needy families out with their necessities. Certainly this week, maybe more than any other week this year, you've realized what it's been like to live in a warm home. Even the preacher didn't want to get out of bed this morning because it was so cold outside, which is not a good thing, just so you know. But we've enjoyed that. We've enjoyed having a house with a heater, and those kinds of things. And so there are folks tonight, there are folks last night, there are folks Friday night who didn't have that. Maybe they had a tent over their head. Maybe they had something to keep the snow or rain or whatever it was off of them. But as far as warmth, as far as meals, as far as all of those things, there were some people who did not have that these last several days. And so our Christmas project that we're going to take up next Sunday night at our candlelight service is going to be to reach out and help families that have some of those basic needs right now at Christmas time. It's great if you buy somebody a toy and that kind of thing, but when you're cold, you just need your heat bill to be paid. When you're hungry, you just need some money for a meal. When you can't get to your job because you don't have gas money, that's the thing that you need at that point. And so right now we have about 5 families that we're going to be helping. Several of those are from Family Promise, which is the ministry that we host here, getting ready to host again in January. But several of those families are ones that have come through that ministry program. Several of others that are families that people in our church know. And so just like I asked you last week, just be praying, asking God, what would you have me to give to that special offering next Sunday night at our candlelight service, and we'll use that money to get out and to pay some electric bills and water bills and those kinds of things, to get some meals and some foods and some groceries, get some gas cards, those kinds of things for a lot of the people who do not have those today. We're doing this series called Experience the Gifts of Christmas. Experience the Gifts of Christmas. I know that many of you have already braved the shopping. I was talking to Mr. Buddy earlier. He said he finally figured out he did most of his shopping this year by Amazon, so he didn't have to fight a crowd or anything. He just had to meet the guy at the door with the package. And so maybe you've done that. Maybe you've braved the crowd or braved the mall and those kinds of things. But we're all familiar with those types of gifts. We're all familiar with the sweater. We're all familiar with the new shirt or whatever it might be that you're hoping to get. But Jesus Christ was born and came not to bring us a shirt, not to get us a gift of a sweater or a coat or something like that, but he came to bring us gifts that were far deeper, far bigger, far greater than we might even imagine. Week 1, we talked about the gift of hope was one of the gifts that the Messiah brought, and we talked about the reality that we can endure just about anything if we have hope. If we have hope, we can endure just about anything. That's how you can watch some people go through some very rough things and some very trying times and some very difficult situations, and yet they have a smile on their face. They're plugging away. They're making it through the storm. They're not letting the storm whip them. Why? Because they have hope. And this Messiah that was born, Jesus Christ, he came not just to give hope to the people of Israel. They had been crying for hope, and they had been in all sorts of situations. But this Messiah also came to bring us hope. I don't know what you're struggling with today. Most of you. Some of you I do. You're here today. I don't know what baggage you brought with you. I don't know what load or what burden that you're carrying here today, but you need to know that the Messiah does know. And that's far more important than if I know that the Messiah knows. And he came to bring hope to all people. Last week we talked about the second thing, which was the gift of peace. He brought the gift of peace, and we talked about those things in our lives that destroy our peace, that make us worry, that makes us anxious, that may even make us scared at times. We talked about unexpected changes in our lives. It's one thing to know a change is coming. It's another thing to wake up tomorrow morning and an unexpected change be waiting on us. We talked about illness and death and disease and those kinds of things will keep you up at night, will keep you worried, will keep you anxious. We talked about wars and rumors of wars and just those kinds of things will destroy your peace. And then we talked about really the one thing that everything boils down to, spiritual darkness, sin. Sin will destroy peace. In fact, I would say sin destroys peace every time. One of the greatest lies that Satan tries to use for you and for me is to convince us that sin is somehow going to satisfy us. Sin is going to somehow fill a hole. Sin is somehow going to do something for us that God cannot do for us. And yet every single time when we sin, it destroys peace in our lives. And so those are the things that we talked about, how the Messiah came to bring us peace. So today we're talking about the third gift, and that is the gift of joy. The gift of joy. Now, I'm not talking about Joy Caldwell, and all during the message today, every time I say joy, don't look that way. I'm not talking about her, but I'm sure she brought great joy to her parents. That's probably one of the reasons she's named Joy. She wasn't named, hey, you. Right? She was named Joy because I'm sure she brought great joy to her parents. But we find in Luke's gospel, Luke chapter 2, a Christmas story. We've looked at, this will be the third different Christmas story that we're looking at, or the same story recorded three different ways. And in Luke chapter 2, let me just read these first 15 or 16 verses to get us into this, and then we will dive into joy. It says, at that time, the Roman Emperor Augustus decreed that a census should be taken throughout the Roman Empire. All returned to their own ancestral towns to register for this census. Because Joseph was a descendant of King David, he had to go to Bethlehem in Judea, David's ancient home. He traveled there from the village of Nazareth in Galilee. He took with him Mary, his fiancée, who was now obviously pregnant. And while they were there, the time came for her baby to be born. She gave birth to her first child, a son. She wrapped him snugly in strips of cloth and laid him in a manger because there was no lodging available for them. That night there were shepherds staying in the fields nearby, guarding their flocks of sheep. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared among them, and the radiance of the Lord's glory surrounded them. They were terrified, but the angel reassured them, "Do not be afraid," he said. "I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord, has been born today in Bethlehem, the city of David. And you will recognize him by this sign. You will find a baby wrapped snugly in strips of cloth, lying in a manger." Suddenly, the angel was joined by a vast host of others, the armies of heaven, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in highest heaven, and peace on earth to those with whom God is pleased." When the angels had returned to heaven, the shepherds said to each other, "Let's go to Bethlehem, and let's see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about." They hurried to the village and found Mary and Joseph, and there was the baby lying in a manger. Lying in a manger. The one verse that jumps out at me in this passage when we talk about joy is verse 10. Verse 10, it says, but the angel, "Do not be afraid," he said. "I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all the people." It's very interesting how little babies bring us great joy. Austin, almost now 21 years ago, was born at 6:50 p.m. on New Year's Eve. All right, some of you have just calculated what happened on New Year's Eve. I got a whole year of tax deduction for about 5 hours. Thank you, government. Right, thank you. But now he's cost me a whole lot more than that over the last 20 years. So I got 1 year break, but I can remember being a young new parent, scared to death. In fact, I was the one who changed Austin's first diaper, and I can remember being in that hotel room, being in that hospital room, which wasn't nearly as nice as they are today. Just for all you young mothers, just realize people had it worse. But being in that hospital room, and he was in there in that little thing that they put him in, and he needed his diaper changed. I remember going over there. First diaper I ever was going to change in my life. Hadn't practiced or anything, and so I just sort of. And when I undid it, I thought Monica had given birth to an alien. because what I was seeing was not natural. But I can remember changing that diaper. I can remember even that first night of him, waking up hungry and screaming and those kinds of things. But those little babies bring us such great joy. Just to give them a little tickle, or to see a smile, or to see a laugh from them, bring us great joy. And I'm sure every mother and father, and by the time Blake got to us 17 months later, I was an expert at all that, so I had no fear, and none of that kind of stuff freaked me out anymore. But when we have those young children, they bring us great joy. And I'm sure this baby that was born, that was wrapped in these cloths, lying in the manger, brought great joy to his mom and dad. I'm sure the laugh and the tickle and the grin and all that brought great joy. But the incredible thing about this Messiah was that he was going to bring great joy to all people. All people who didn't know his mom and didn't know his dad, people who would never see him physically. He was going to bring great joy to all people. So I want to talk for just a couple of minutes about how this Messiah brings us and gives us joy. How this Messiah gives us joy. The first way is the Messiah gives us joy in Jesus. Joy in Jesus. This baby that was born, baby Jesus, that we celebrate, he did not stay a baby. He did not stay a child. He grew up. He matured. This Messiah that the shepherds went to see, he grew up. This Messiah that the wise men brought gifts to, he became a child, a toddler. He ran around. He played. He became a teenager and worked with his father. He grew up and became a man. The baby who was hunted by Herod grew up and would literally change the world even today. The baby Jesus grew up, and Luke 2:52, a few verses later, it tells us he grew in wisdom and in stature, and it says he grew in favor of all men. He was one of those people that when you came across him, your life was changed by him, even if you didn't understand why it was being changed. He was the young baby, or the young baby grew up to be the child at 12 who was teaching in the temple, and it said that all the teachers were amazed at his understanding. All the teachers were amazed at what he was saying, and it says that he spoke as one with authority. Yeah, he sort of did have some authority. He wrote what he was saying. I mean, he was the author of what he was saying. This teenager grew up and he honored his mother and his father as he grew up, as only he could do. He began his ministry at 30, and he took 12 guys sort of from different cultures and different aspects, and he took them and he trained them and he mentored them and he poured into them and he taught them for 3 years. This baby grew up to be the one who would perform many, many miracles. And in fact, always keep this in mind. The miracles you read about in the Scriptures are literally the tip of the iceberg. The Scriptures tell us that if it were to have recorded every single thing that this baby did when he grew up, that every miracle that he performed, the world could not contain all the volumes. So this Messiah gives us joy in Jesus. This baby that was so innocent lying there in the manger grew up to be the man that would take the whips and the beating and the spitting and the scourging and the humiliation. He would take the crown of thorns and the cross for our sins. So this Messiah gives us joy in Jesus. Not only that, but he gives us joy in life. Jesus said several times, more than once, Jesus said, I've came to give you abundant life. This relationship that we can have with Jesus Christ is not just about heaven. It's about today. He said, I've come that you could have life to the full. An abundant life, a life full of joy. Part of the relationship that we get to enjoy with Jesus Christ is he gives us the gift of the Holy Spirit. He pours into us. He gives us joy even in the middle of our earthly storms. You've been through storms before. You know what I'm talking about. Many of you have weathered some storms that have come your way. Some of you are in the middle of a storm right now. But you know what it means when you have this relationship with Jesus to have joy in this life, even in the middle of earthly struggles. If you're part of the Perry community, you know that there's two twin brothers who are dentists. And when we moved to Perry 15 years ago, some of our first questions were, who do we go see to be a doctor? Who do we go see for a doctor? Who do we go see for a dentist? Who do we go see for an eye doctor? Well, we had our pediatrician picked out really quick because when we were here visiting, Blake got sick with the stomach flu, and for 3 days they kept saying, well, let us just take him to see Dr. Dan. We're like, nah, we don't want to bother anybody. He's better. He hadn't thrown up in a long time. He's good. And they just kept, let us take him to see Dr. Dan. It'll be really quick. Finally, about the third day, we said, okay, we'll go see Dr. Dan. And literally we walked into Dr. Dan's office. He said, yep, take him to the hospital. He's dehydrated from the flu. And so Blake spent 2 days getting fluids at the Perry Hospital. So our pediatrician was pretty handpicked for us. So that was pretty good. And he's still their pediatrician today, even though they're almost 20 and 21. But anyway, but then we found Dr. Brantley. Where do we go find a doctor for me and Monica? And so Dr. Brantley is our doctor. And so for the last 8 years, he's like, Rick, you got to lose some weight. Rick, you got to lose some weight. Rick, you got to lose some weight. So you can, he's been pushing that to me and those kinds of things. And then an eye doctor was Dr. Dixon, and somebody just referred him, and we went there. But then somebody said, for a dentist, you need to go see the Shelton boys. They grew up in this community, went off to college, they came back, they run a dental practice, and so that's where we've been. They've been our dentist for 15 years. And for some of you, they've been your dentist a lot longer than that. And one of the brothers, Thomas, right? I always get them confused. Thomas, several years ago, got a brain tumor. And so for several years, he has walked the journey and the struggle of having a brain tumor. And they tried several different kinds of things and all that kind of stuff. He's a young guy, 50-ish. Dennis, I'm looking at you. 52, okay. 52 years old, young guy, and 4 kids and all that. And yet he walked this journey with joy. Part of the joy was because he knew what was waiting for him as a strong, strong believer. He knew what was waiting for him in eternity and in heaven and in his home. But he also knew that even in these last few months and the last few weeks, even as he was just laying in bed, he realized that Jesus Christ was with him. He was not far from him. He was near to him. He was not outside of his home. He was in his home. He was not away from his family. He was with his family. And Jesus gives us joy in this life, even in the middle of your biggest storm. Jesus also gives us joy in eternity. Joy in eternity. He has come to give us life and to give us life to the full, give us an abundant life here on this earth. But there is a reward awaiting the believer. There is a place and a time when the believer will get to heaven. And it's sort of like the old song goes, when we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. Why? Because we're going to sing and shout the victory, right? There is a reward awaiting the believer. There is joy in eternity. Revelations 21 and verse 3 and 4 says, I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them and they will be his people. God himself will be with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or sorrow or crying or pain. All of these things are gone forever. So this baby Jesus gives us joy. The Messiah gives us joy in Jesus. He gives us joy in life, and He gives us joy in eternity. And so the question today becomes, do you have the relationship with this Messiah? Is he your Savior? Has he come to save you? Have you accepted the gift of salvation that this little baby was born to bring? Do you have that personal relationship with him that when you're going through your storms, you know that you have joy with Jesus? Maybe that's a hard question to answer. So I want to wrap up today by giving you 3 signs of a joyous person. You can sort of do a self-evaluation today. When you leave here, you can look at these 3 points. Is that me? Is that not me? And you can identify if you're a person who is living with joy. Here's the 3 signs. The first one is a joyous person is grateful. A person who lives with joy is grateful, or maybe we might even would say thankful. You know, when someone is grateful, they realize that they have been entrusted with something, not entitled to something. Let that sink in. That's a pretty deep thought. You might want to write that one down. When we are thankful, when we are grateful, we realize that whatever we have has been entrusted to us, and nothing that we have are we entitled to. We're raising a generation now in our world, and particularly in our country, of entitlement. Of everybody thinks you owe them this. Your 8-year-old thinks you owe them a cell phone. Your 10-year-old thinks you owe them a car. I mean, it's become ridiculous, the things that we think we are entitled to. But the person who is grateful realizes that every single thing you have has been entrusted to you by God. Your very home that you woke up in today has been entrusted to you by God. Your family, your possessions, your job, your career, all of those things that you have, and the list goes on and on and on. All of those things have been entrusted to you by God, and nothing about us makes us entitled to any of those things. So the person that lives with joy is grateful for those things. It made me think of one of the people that we work with in Ukraine. Over there's a lot of people named Vlad and Vladimir and those kinds of things. And so Graciela just started numbering them. Vlad number 1, Vlad number 2. I'm sure by the time we go back, there'll be a 3rd, 4th, and a 5th of Vlad. But Vlad number 2 has a very interesting story. Several years ago, when Russia began to invade Ukraine, they began to literally come across the border, reclaim land that they were wanting to take over. And in doing that, there were lots of people who needed to be evacuated. And so Vlad had a friend who was literally just going back and forth, getting groups of people and bringing them more inland, more into the middle of the Ukraine to bring them to safety. And he called Vlad one day and said, I need help to do this. Will you help me? And he said, sure, I'll go and do it. So he began going, and literally, they have a van. I'm sure they're not real particular about seatbelt laws over there when you're evacuating. So maybe 12, 10, 15 people at a time. He would drive over there, load up, and drive to get these people out of the militarized zone. The people who would go, there were some people who said, no, I'm staying here. I've been here all my life. I'll die here. Whatever happens, I'm not leaving. So there were some who stayed, but there were many who fled to the middle, to the inside, to the central part of Ukraine. One day, Vlad got stopped. They said, let's see your papers, let's see your passport and your identification and all that kind of stuff. And they captured him. And by captured, I don't mean they gently put him in a car and took him off to a resort. I mean they literally put him in almost like a dungeon. And he began the process of, they literally would burn him daily with cigarettes and cigars. And even today you see scars on his arms where they would do that. Daily they would take him out of where they were holding him, tell him to get on his knees, and daily he would feel a barrel of a gun to the back of his head. They were just sort of mentally trying to torture him to do this, until one day they said, today you're dying today. We're killing you today. When he got captured, his wife didn't know where he was at for several days. And so she's inland or in the center of the country, and she knows where he went, but his cell phone isn't working, and they took that, and she don't know, if his car just broke down, has he been killed? She didn't know what was going on. And yet, when you look at those people today, and the end of the story is about the time they were getting ready to kill him, and I know you're going to say, "Nah, Rick, this is a preacher's story. I know what you're doing." No. About the time they were getting ready to kill him, somebody rode by in a car, the general, and the general's wife was in the car. And they were riding by, and the wife told the general, "Stop. You're not killing that guy." I mean, made for Lifetime movie. I mean, come on. And literally the car stopped, the general got out, and the general told Vlad, "Today's your lucky day." And he was freed. And if you see a picture of them on Facebook today, and many of you are friends of mine or whoever, Graciella's and those kinds of things, and you see a picture of him and his wife today, and they're standing there and they're smiling, it's because they are so thankful and grateful for God's blessing on them. And even today, he still goes back 2 and 3 times a week to minister, to take food to that area, to do those things. So the person who is joyous is a person who is very grateful and very thankful. The second thing is they're very content. They're very content. Paul said in Philippians 4:11, "Not that I was ever in need," he says, "for I have learned how to be content with whatever I had." He has learned how to be content. It's not a natural thing to be content. In the world that we live in, whether it's culture or whatever, it sort of pushes us not to be content, to never be satisfied. And yet Paul said he learned how to be content. And I spent a lot of time this week thinking about this word contentment, because I've had conversations with people and they think, "Oh, that means I don't go for my next job promotion. That means I don't ever change anything about my life. I'm content." No, here's what contentment means. This is not Webster's definition, but mine. It is being okay or having joy in your stage and station of life, that you can keep and maintain correct priorities. To be okay with where you're at today, enough that you can maintain your priorities. Many people have lost their jobs because they were not content. Because they weren't content, they made a shady deal. Because they weren't content, they gossiped and backstabbed at work, and the people because they weren't content, they took some money from the register thinking we'll pay it back later. Because they weren't content, there's many people who have lost their jobs. There's a lot of people who are in debt today because they weren't content with where they were at. So rather than maintain their correct priorities, they went out and charged it and got it, and somehow they got it, and now they're still paying on it. There are many people who had affairs who were not content. And they thought, well, this will satisfy it. This will change it. The jails are full of people today who never learned how to be content. Because somewhere along the line, the correct priorities, the correct character, the integrity got thrown out the window for whatever. Here's something I read this week online. People who are content, these are some signs of people who are content. People who are content sleep well. I mean, when they lay down, they could just go to sleep, have a good conscience, know that they've done well that day. People who are content laugh more. They laugh more because they're not so worried or anxious about whatever their next push is. They celebrate life. They can celebrate the successes of other people when you're content. When you're not content and you see somebody else get a raise or promotion or success, you get bitter, you get angry. Why isn't that me? Why didn't I get that? But someone who is content can celebrate the accomplishments of others. People who are content save money. People who are content save money. They don't live with the mentality of, I have to spend all I have. And the last thing it said was people who are content give generously. Give generously. So again, this is just sort of a self-assessment for you. Are you grateful and thankful? Are you content with where you're at? And then here's the third thing. Are you generous? Are you generous? Are you generous with your time and your energy and your money and your love? Do you give freely of yourself, or do you hoard yourself to yourself? Are you generous with time? Are you willing to help somebody out? Are you willing to help somebody move or help somebody do a project? For years, Steve Caldwell came up here Fridays and Saturdays and would do all sorts of projects around the church. for years. And some of the projects he did were so small and he did them so fast you never even realized it was broken. And I can remember one Sunday the toilet wouldn't stop running with water. And Steve just comes up here and somehow makes it stop running with water until the appropriate time. But for years he's done that. For years he's been generous with his time. And can I just tell you, from a pastor's perspective, while he's now battling and battling his cancer and taking his treatments and doing all of that, there are things around this church that are falling apart. We need some people who are generous with their time. You don't want me fixing it, I'm telling you. They need the people who are generous with their energy. We live in a world today, this is something new, a new phenomenon. Maybe you're familiar with it. You ever heard the term side hustle? Anybody heard that? Everybody today has a side hustle. Now, I only see the younger people nodding. Here's what a side hustle is. Your side hustle is your second and third job that you have. You have a career, you have a profession, but you have a side hustle. You have a side hustle after 5 o'clock. You have a side hustle on the weekend. You have a side hustle of something else that you're doing. And can I tell you that for most people today, you only have so much energy. Nobody in here is Superman. And so you spend all week working and then you spend your free time on your side hustle. And the question is, do you have any energy to give anybody else? People are generous with their money. I read the story this week of the widow's mite. Maybe you remember the story. The people were lined up at the temple to give their offerings. And so there's lines of people. I mean, it wasn't just one person showing up. It was lines of people. And so you would come and there would be a big old bucket type of thing right there, and you would just put your thing. They didn't have paper money back then, and so, whether it was this piece of coin or that piece of coin or whatever it was, how much ever it was, you came and gave that offering. Well, one of the things that would happen is that people who were real wealthy that were bringing a lot of times would just sort of make a show of their offering. Almost like, let me let all this drip in here real slow. Like ding 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 ding, trying to make a show of their offering. So in that line of people were some wealthy people like that, and they would come and they would try to make a show, and they would drop it in so that everybody would notice how much they were putting in the offering. In that line of people was this poor old lady, is about the only way to describe her. So when she got up to the bucket, all she did was ting, ting. 2 little pieces. Here's what Jesus said about her. Mark chapter 12, verses 41 to 44. It said, the widows, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions. For they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she, as poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on. People who are generous with their time, are generous with their energy, are generous with their money, and they're generous with their love. If I were to ask you today who you respect most in this world, some may say, well, Billy Graham, I respect him a great deal. Some might say Mother Teresa, I respected her a great deal. Some might say a parent or a coworker or a boss. But I guarantee you that whoever you would say you respect the most, you would probably describe that person as being very loving. Whether you felt it personally, whether you felt it firsthand, whether you watched it from afar or watched it from a distance like many of us have with Billy Graham. I mean, however you saw it, however you felt it, probably the person you respect the most today is the person you saw give love. So, is that us? As we sit here today, are we people who are joyous? Are we people who are living with joy? Or are we people who are content? Are we people who are generous? Are we people who are caring and loving and kind? Or are we those people today? Are we grateful? Are we thankful? Are we living with joy today? I'm going to wrap up by saying this Messiah that came, this baby that was born, brought incredible joy to his parents. And I'm sure as he grew up, let's just be honest, there was no discipline problems with him, which made the parents' job a whole lot easier, made life a whole lot better. And as he grew up and brought great, incredible joy to his parents, as then he pulled these 12 men together and poured into their lives and brought great joy to them. As he was arrested out in the garden in the middle of the night, and the next day endured trials and beatings, he did that to bring great joy to us. Do you have joy today? Have you experienced the gift of joy in your life?